time to get an overall sense of the direction of travel for sponsorship and the sponsorship market in 2021 globally, but also across the MENA region. And to do that, we've drafted in Charles Russell Speechlys, the international law firm headquartered in the UK with offices in the Middle East, Asia and Europe. It has one of the largest and best established legal sports offerings internationally, having built its reputation for work in sport for more than 100 years. 100 years of practice, David. Its sector-specific team work alongside the sports industry on a daily basis and have global expertise that spans across the full spectrum of sport, including rugby, football, horse racing, tennis, athletics, cricket, boxing, and many more. And we're delighted to be joined now by Mark Hill, partner and head of commercial technology, media, telecommunications, and IP Middle East, and Richard Davies, senior associate commercial from Charles Russell Speechlys.
Yes, Mark has been based in the UAE for over 20 years. Clients including the International Cricket Council, CSM Middle East and Media Pro Group. And Richard, a commercial lawyer specialising in the sports industry, sponsorship, media rights and technology deals, as we will hear. And clients of his include the ICC, the International Tennis Federation, Ascot Racecourse, and he recently advised Nike on its landmark kit deal with Liverpool FC. So we're in good hands. Great to have you both with us. Mark, let me come to you first, if I can. What kinds of renegotiation between brands and rights holders have you been seeing across the market over the past year or so as we've been all living this pandemic?
Good afternoon. How is everybody? A variety of different things, I would say. There have been some pandemic-specific issues coming up, particularly, I guess, in the MENA region, which is where I'm based. In the broader context, though, from my experience, Richard has a slightly different perspective, but from my experience, it's been quite a lot to do with the developing sponsorship market within the Middle East. In any case, things have changed quite a lot over the years, and I think now we're faced with an increasing degree of sophistication very often in the kind of contractual arrangements that are put in place between parties looking at a sponsorship offering, but with a Middle Eastern aspect, whether it be because somebody is based here or because there is some Middle Eastern aspect to the sponsorship deal. So it's that, I guess, which is a continuing process, and that increasing degree of sophistication, I guess, is what drives negotiations generally. And then, as I say, on the pandemic side, then there have been not perhaps renegotiations, but there's certainly been an increased focus on certain areas, with everybody obviously crystal ball gazing and wondering what's going to happen in the future and when.
Richard, jump in and give us a perspective from at least being based in the UK, working with all sorts of international clients. What have you been seeing across the sports market?
Sure. I think looking back to around this time last year when everything changed in the sports world and all the events were cancelled, pretty much every sponsor and rights holder that we work with was looking at all of their contracts to work out what the impact was of the cancellations and the continued uncertainty. And there was a huge period of just a bit of crisis management and trying to work out what the position was. And a lot of the negotiations that took place at that stage were actually relatively straightforward. So the number of deferrals of deals, so the events that took place at a later date, some reductions in rights fees, some alternative inventory which was provided by rights holders to fill the gap that was left by some of the events that didn't take place. And I think what was a very good thing to see was actually how few formal disputes there were. So particularly with rights holders which couldn't deliver events, they were able to deliver alternative inventory or keep their sponsors happy. But I think one of the things that we shouldn't lose is the fact that the sponsors were scrutinising those contracts and looking at everything as to what their options were. Could they reduce? Could they terminate? In many cases, they didn't actually exercise those positions if they were core deals that they were very happy with, and the rights holders have done a good job over the period of the deals in activating and showing the value that sponsors stuck with them. But I think from our perspective, seeing it from the legal side, we certainly see that what was in those contracts really did matter. The sponsors, they may have accepted alternative inventory in certain cases, but in cases where they have a clear right to get a refund or a reduction, they were exercising those rights as well. So it's a real mix depending on the nature of the relationship, which is clearly key in all of these sponsorship deals.
And Richard, what has that looked like in practice? Is it about completely changing the structures of deals? Is it about adding clauses and sort of making amendments as you work through a contract? What's the reality been for you and your team?
Yeah, I think it has varied depending on whether it's existing deals or new deals that we're advising on. I think with the existing deals generally, some of them have been amended in relatively minor ways. I don't think we've seen wholesale renegotiations, ripping up deals and starting again. It has been a matter of dealing with these issues very practically. So even where alternative inventory has been provided, and maybe a reduction in rights fees has been agreed in certain circumstances, it's all been handled relatively simply with emails, letters going back and forth rather than sort of big scale renegotiations. On the legal side, we're always trying to tell our clients to document things more formally than potentially they want to on the commercial side. So I would say in general, it's been handled more on the commercial side than with the legal teams. Certainly in the cases where we haven't got to the more disputed contentious side of things.
Mark, if we come back to your sort of geographical area of expertise in the MENA region, yesterday on the live show here, we had ADNOC on talking about their sponsorship portfolio. We'll have a lot of people tuning into this from rights holder organisations looking at the brand sponsor market out there in the Middle East. And what would you say to those rights holders that they need to be mindful of in terms of the particular challenges of partnering with a brand in the MENA region?
Okay, I mean, good question. I watched the ADNOC session yesterday as well. It's a flip side question, I think, for MENA region. You mentioned the word challenges, but similarly, it is a region filled with opportunity currently. Probably two watch notices that I would mention to anybody looking at negotiating and/or contracting in this region. It looks very similar, and in many ways it is, but you will end up, from certainly a contractual and a legal point of view, having to have regard to the fact that we have a very multi-layered region here. So one of the things that you always will have to do is to look at the scope of the offering, the geographical, including at an activation level, the geographical reach of any contract that you're looking at. And then you have to bear in mind that you may end up with a mix of rules depending on what it is you're going to be doing and which country within the region that you're going to be doing it. And that brings up some interesting questions when you are looking at negotiating certain contractual points relating to what your law and jurisdiction is going to be under the contract. Are we going to base it here? Are we going to base it outside of region? People look at contracting entities, or at least people should look at contracting entities to be very aware of who it is at the end of the day that is giving obligations, warranties, indemnities, and so on. And then you also just have to bear in mind that, again, although it looks similar, there are differences. So the way that a court or an arbitration forum in this part of the world might look at, for example, an indemnity provision will be very different. So those kind of issues that Richard is talking about, they are equally applicable here, but we just have to bear in mind that things can be different and there can be variations. I mean, one of the other areas, I guess, of major challenge and opportunity for the region is the increasing sophistication that I mentioned earlier on. So brands and contracting parties who have interest in the sponsorship arena within the Middle East it far more is operating within very clear lines in terms of what it is everybody is looking to get out of the sponsorship partnership. Partnership is a good word that you mentioned in your question. So it's very driven towards the being aware of those sides and what the level of sophistication is of the contracting party that you're going to be dealing with. Again, it has changed an awful lot in the last 10, 20, 30 years.
You mentioned it's changed a lot in the last 20, 30 years. Do you expect that change, that evolution in the way that sponsorship contracts are put together to change further? And what types of changes are you expecting?
Yes and no. Again, I think Richard can probably give an international perspective on that. From a Middle Eastern point of view, that level of increased sophistication has led to an increased focus on issues such as the pricing discussion. Everybody talks about ROI within a sponsorship context, but within this region, I guess there's a lot more focus on activation cost as being relevant to the pricing discussion. And instead of maybe a focus on ROI, maybe more of a value to cost discussion. So those kind of concepts, I think it is necessary, whichever side of the sponsorship contracting fence you're on, are important for you to be aware of. They will inevitably, I think, in this part of the region come up increasingly. We have to have an increased focus all the time on what the interest areas for everybody are. It's never just a shirt deal anymore, to use an analogy. The level of partnership and engagement with contracting partners within the sponsorship arena is much broader, is much more detailed these days. And that is, to me, what is going to change contracting scope and practice, I would say, within negotiating these kind of deals moving forward. We're already seeing it.
Yeah, and I'd just say on that the financial metrics that we see in contracts and sponsorship contracts are often relatively blunt instruments. The focus increasingly is on ROI and measuring and the data which allows sponsors and rights holders to show the value, but that doesn't usually translate into the actual fees that are paid in a direct way. So during the course of the partnership, the metrics are not usually set out and linked to pay. So performance-based pay is still a relatively uncommon mechanism in particularly big ticket deals. That a lot of the deals will be relatively blunt instruments that, for example, sponsors of football clubs will base fees on the performance on the pitch in terms of qualification for certain tournaments or which leagues they're competing in. But those are very blunt instruments to the actual ROI, which is being achieved by the sponsor for that particular deal and the activations which they are doing under it. So I think actually from the legal side, what we're seeing, which is a more interesting angle, I think, is the sophistication of the partnerships and the nature of the partnerships. So one example I'd give is a deal that we've advised on this year for the International Tennis Federation with Microsoft around the Billie Jean King Cup. And that is a technology partnership where Microsoft will be offering on-court real-time data insights into the actual matches which are happening. And you see this in Microsoft's other activities with the ECB and cricket and the NFL, that type of technology partnership, which has a direct impact on the sport that they're working with, that's a much more sophisticated way of demonstrating what that partnership is about, rather than some of the activations which you might be seeing.
Richard, we've obviously been through a period where certain rights and assets simply haven't been available despite being contracted. And I think it seems, observing and talking to a number of rights holders and brands, there has generally been quite a good spirit of cooperation. Nobody could have predicted what we've all been through, but nonetheless, the potential for disputes is certainly there and ever present. What are some of the perhaps simple things that rights holders and brands that they're partnering with can do to avoid or reduce the chances of dispute?
Yeah, I think obviously we have seen an uptick in the disputes angle over the last year, just because of the pressure on sponsors and finances. And I think in terms of the rights holders, they can document when they are over delivering, which is very common. The rights holders will often have a contract which says what they are contracted to deliver, but will actually be delivering far more benefits. So whether that's in terms of social media activity or the activations that they're doing, they often do over deliver. So documenting that as a way of relying on in the future if there is a non-delivery for other reasons, then that's obviously important. I mean, having the right contractual basis to make sure that you're not in breach of contract if events are cancelled because of forces which are far beyond your control, which the pandemic has obviously been one of those issues. And then having some fallbacks in contracts that deal with these situations. So if there is a very thorny issue of valuations and putting a value on a refund, potentially, or a reduction, how is that handled? We see expert determination used in various contracts and contexts, which can be quite a useful tool, including something which allows a mechanism for a dispute to be settled quite quickly, rather than it being a potential court action and big dispute in that way. But I think the overall thing which we have seen most rights holders do in the last year is being flexible. Their events aren't going ahead. There is going to be a financial impact on whether that's the rights holder in terms of the income is not there from sponsors. They have to recognise that there is an impact, and it's just about where that is allocated and being as flexible as possible in terms of and providing the alternative inventory to the extent that they can.
Long may that flexibility continue. Richard Davies, Mark Hill, thank you very, very much for joining us today.